Hey there. Anybody on yet? Just wanted to do the daily check-in and see how everybody's doing and maybe kind of do a different type of summary than we're seeing in the news. I feel like every day in the news there's more and more panic. And part of that is you wake up in the morning and you don't know, is this it? Are we finally gonna stay in some bit of stability? No, by the end of the day, there's news about an extra quarantine or extra limitations. Like last night, all of a sudden, Mayor de Blasio in New York City says, we might do a complete curfew and we'll arrest you if you leave your house. And Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, says that's ridiculous. So we all go to sleep and we just have no idea, no clue about how to live our lives. And I understand that the importance of the coronavirus is above the individual needs of the people. Like, we're trying to save millions of lives. But is it really that serious? Is it really necessary to just scare people more and more every day? I think you have to also limit the mental health damage. You have to limit the economic damage. And it's possible, I'm of the belief that it's possible to do all of these things at the same time. So I kind of want to actually go through some good news on the coronavirus, and I also plan on doing a podcast later with Peter Diamandis, who's been on my podcast before. I plan on doing a podcast later to cover these more in depth, but let's go over some of the new cases first, or some of the new good news. So someone just asked, did you hear China lied? It's true, China lied. Their cases are underreported. But let's not forget, again, China has a population of 2 billion people, and they've reported 3,000 or 4,000 deaths. Okay, multiply that by 20. Multiply that by 30. Heck, even say that they were lying, multiply it by 50, and then take the U.S. equivalent. That is still less than a mild flu by the time this passes. Now, I heard someone say yesterday, if they quarantine us, is it a quarantine for years? No, here's why a quarantine works. And by the way, I'm not recommending a quarantine, but just to answer that one question, here's how a quarantine works. This virus lasts on a surface for 4 or 5 days, maybe 7 days, and then it's dead. It lasts in a human body for about 3 weeks, and then it's dead. So if everybody in the world quarantined for 3 weeks, the entire virus would be dead. I'm not recommending that's what people do because I don't think that that's necessary. That's like saying, okay, it's the beginning of flu season. Everybody should just stay indoors for 4 weeks and then there won't be any flus. No one's going to say that. That doesn't make any sense. So let's actually understand what the good news is. First off, China has seen new cases plummet. China, which was the beginning of this, China was a horror story. China, they were supposedly burning bodies in the street. China has so few new cases that they finally just closed the very last hospital. They set up a bunch of new hospitals to deal with coronavirus. They have now closed all of them because there's simply no new cases. So I'm not saying hooray for China. What this tells me is that, once again, there is a timeline on this pandemic. Containment or no containment, these pandemics seem to last about 3 months from beginning to end. And so what? Call it 4 months. Call it 6 weeks. Who knows? But they seem to last about 3 months on average in South Korea, in China, maybe in other places. I don't know. And then the peak pandemic is in a month and a half. Now, and that means, what does peak coronavirus means? It means that every day after that, we'll still see new cases, but the number of new cases won't be doubling every day. It'll start to go down. This is really important to understand. Okay, and someone said, is China lying to us? I just answered that. Assume China is lying to us. Assuming there's more than 3,000 deaths. Just make up a number. Say that there's 100,000 deaths, 33 times as much. It's still not bad when you compare China with 2 billion people to the U.S. with 300 million people. So here's what I want to suggest, is that everybody's talking about how there's this important number in pandemics called the R0 number. And what that means is if you get infected, you tend to infect the R naught number of people. So China was saying initially the R naught number was 2.4, meaning for every person who got infected, another 2.4 would get infected after them. And that's a very serious number. That means there's going to be, what that means is that the entire world will get infected fairly quickly. That was what the fear was. That's why everybody's in lockdown. That's why people are panicking. But the reality is the R naught number starts off high, but what seems to be happening is that it levels off. Because what happens in the very beginning of a pandemic is that very quickly the population that's most susceptible gets the virus, and then afterwards fewer and fewer people get the virus, and the virus also gets weaker as it passes through a population. So the R naught number starts off maybe at 2, but then it goes down to 1. Maybe it goes down to less than 1. That's what happens at peak coronavirus, which happens about a month and a half after it starts. So no matter how much containment we do, no matter what, eventually it'll stop doubling every day. All the mathematical models I see, whether it's in the New York Times or the Harvard report or whatever, it just assumes that it keeps doubling forever. It doesn't keep doubling forever. If you take away anything, know that the coronavirus has a lifespan of about 3 months. It has peak lifespan of about a month and a half, which means that's the point where it stops doubling, and maybe even the R naught goes below 1, meaning each one person starts infecting less than 1 people. And eventually, even China, which was the worst hit of every country, and China is just a mess. Today, they're closing down the last hospital they had set up devoted to coronavirus. So, and all 42 Apple stores in China have reopened. China's stock markets are at all-time highs. Chinese factories have reopened. This virus does not last forever. Whether you do a quarantine or not do a quarantine, it's important to know the virus does not last forever. The other thing is, people are doing a lot of research on antiviral drugs. So yes, the typical drug takes 3 years and $2 billion to go through the FDA and get approved. That's not going to happen here. A lot of research is going to happen extremely quickly. I'm seeing more and more research that an anti-malarial drug called chloroquine is working. Now, I will tell you what I do. Consult your own doctor and do your own research. But the herbs that make up the initial agents within chloroquine seem to be related to an over-the-counter drug called lactoferrin, which I've been taking. Again, I don't know if it works. I've just seen evidence, and I've confirmed it with some other people that it's worth a try. But lactoferrin, lactoferrin, is available on Amazon. It's good. It's notably good for leg cramps, but it also has some strong antiviral effects, and it improves the immune system. So I've been taking it. I don't know if it works or not, but it seems to be related to this prescription drug called chloroquine, which works on malaria, and there's some evidence from a lot of different labs now that it might work on the coronavirus, both as preventive and if you get it. I don't mean to pass any fake news about drugs, so please do your own research or consult a doctor or whatever. Who knows if there's side effects, blah, blah, blah. But again, I'm trying to focus on good news, because every day, what's even worse for me than hearing all the rising death cases is what new restriction will happen by the end of the day. And this is why I said the other day, just because the market goes up 9% in a day, that's not good news. It's not good news when there's so much uncertainty that the market's going up and down, up and down, up and down. You want to wait for things to be calm. Wait for that moment to have opportunities. Don't look at the stock market all day. Whether it's going up or down, it's better if it just goes up 0.5% a day for a bunch of days and not all this insanity. So someone said, why do I say the Chinese market has an all-time high? You don't see that. I saw it as a news article the other day, but you know what? Let me just confirm it. Let me see the chart of the Chinese stock market. I don't know. What is the Chinese stock market? Here's the Shanghai index. You're right. It doesn't look like the Shanghai index is at an all-time high. Oh, but it looks like it was at a pretty good high. Wait, hold on. I'm not looking at. All right, I'll check it out in a little bit. But It does look like a few days ago, China was nearing an all-time high, and then it started to slip. But anyway, more on the good news. A lot of companies are working on vaccines. I do also think people are going crazy about the fatality rate. We don't know what the fatality rate is until we know how many asymptomatic people there are, meaning how many people are walking around right now with no symptoms, who have the virus, who will never be tested. So in the early days of H1N1 in 2009, which was the swine flu, everybody thought it had a fatality rate of 3.4%. Afterwards, when they tested the full population, people realized, oh my gosh, there were tens of millions of people who had this who had no symptoms. And the fatality rate was no better than the flu. So what we're going to, it seems there are some theories that about 90% of the people who get coronavirus are asymptomatic. They're never going to have symptoms, which means that the fatality rate we're seeing in the news, it could be less than 1/10 of that. So again, a fatality rate worldwide that would be similar to the flu fatality rate. And again, don't forget, a country like China with 2 billion people had reported deaths of 3,000, but let's assume China's lying. Let's say they were lying even by 50 times. So let's say there were 150,000 deaths. That's still tiny compared to a population of 2 billion people. And let's not forget, China is filled with smokers. There's huge pollution. There are a lot of things in China that could create a greater mortality rate than will happen in the U.S. My guess is the ultimate fatality rate in the U.S. will be kind of around flu levels, if not less. So again, should we be doing quarantining? I don't have an answer. I think probably the best thing is social distancing. For instance, I don't want to get coronavirus, so the best thing for me is to do social distancing. But then again, I don't want to get the flu either. So what do? I avoid people who have the flu. But it's harder to avoid people with coronavirus because they're walking around without symptoms in many cases. So it's better to just stay inside and do social distancing. But to start to say there's going to be a nationwide curfew or you're going to get arrested and we're going to send in the military, this to me, when you kind of up the restrictions every single day, that's what's creating more terror in the population than anything else. Someone's asking, what about the second wave of Spanish flu? Let's not count. There was 3 waves of Spanish flu. Let's not count the first wave for a second. The second wave was the one wave that killed tens of millions of people. The second wave after that didn't kill as many people. It went from 20 million deaths to 200,000 deaths. But the big difference between this and the Spanish flu was, or several big differences. One is this coronavirus tends to affect more people over 70 or 80. So people who are elderly should absolutely stay inside and avoid people who have it. This is incredibly important to save your life. But the Spanish flu affected children. So it's a huge, huge difference. It affected our future generations of society. Also, nobody paid attention to it. So like we were having parades right in the middle of the Spanish flu. It was insane, the kind of activities we were doing. So there's a huge difference between our understanding of treatment of disease now and during Spanish flu. And there's a huge difference between the demographic this affects and now. So yeah, someone asked, did that arcade game fit in my bag of 15 items? No, it did not. By the way, that arcade game only cost me $300 and it has all my favorite games as a child. It has Defender, Joust, and so on. It's important to relax and have fun. Let me just say it. The news is better. The actual facts are better than what the news is saying. Don't forget, newspapers and politicians have different agendas than you and me. Newspapers want to sell the news. So big headlines, coronavirus kills a baby, you have to buy it. So, and the politicians, they don't want to be accused later of not paying enough attention. So they have to do whatever it takes. They use everything in their arsenal to fight this vaccine. And I'm not necessarily against what they're doing. I just don't like when every single day they escalate. Okay, well, now you're not allowed to, go to the work. Now you're not allowed to go to the grocery store. Now you're not allowed to gather in groups of more than 3 people. It starts to sound very military-like, And it gets scarier and scarier every day in terms of the number of restrictions. And so I think the government should back off on that at some point. Someone says Defender is the greatest game of all time. I agree. So the other thing is people are saying, there's vaccines in the works right now. There are 3 or 4 different companies researching vaccines and putting vaccines in trials. Everyone's going to say it's going to take 18 months to get a vaccine out there. Maybe that's true. I don't know. My feeling is if a vaccine works, people are going to be willing to try it out within 6 months, even if we don't know the full safety results. My feeling is leave it up to the individual whether or not they want to try a vaccine. Let people do their own research. Leave it up to the individual. There are great scientists working on these vaccines and trying to determine if they're safe or not. Certainly, coronavirus will change and mutate and not be the same a year from now, but it will still exist the same as a year. It'll still exist a year from now. If you think about it, the Asian flu pandemic in 1957, this mutated. It still exists in the population to some extent and mutated into bird flu and swine flu and so on. So these viruses stay with us for a long time, but they either get less or sometimes they get more. Question is, would I try a vaccine? I probably would, but it depends. I'd have to do my research on the safety. Like if it's 6 months from now and everybody seems to be safe and no side effects, I would probably try it, even though they suggest waiting 12 months. But, there's also lots of potential treatments for this. So right now they're researching all these ex-HIV drugs. They're researching all these anti-malaria drugs. I already talked about chloroquine and maybe its OTC equivalent, lactoferrin. They're researching using the white blood cells of one person infected to inoculate other people. So who knows? There's a lot of possible cures. I think the main thing that I want to get out of this right now is that the mortality rate is not as big as people are claiming. I've read the worst things in the newspapers. There could be 100 million deaths. There's not even going to be 1% of that. And you just have to look at the examples of China, South Korea, the cruise ship, the demographics of the United States. What's more likely is that they're going to realize that most people have asymptomatic, no symptoms, and so that most people are not affected at all, and that of the remaining 10%, a very tiny percentage, less than 0.5%, will end up having a fatality, which is horrible, but it's not what people are saying. Also, we don't really know how many people get it versus how many people are exposed. It could be that they're saying up to 70% of the U.S. will get it. That's ridiculous. Did 70% of China get it? Not as far as we know. My guess is 5 to 10% of the U.S. or less might get this disease, and then some small percentage of that will have fatal results. So I think there should be kind of a clamp on more and more restrictions every day. Like that's what's actually scaring people, not the number of deaths. Eventually, the number of deaths will start to not increase every day, but will start to stabilize, and then will start to go down. In Italy, there's some evidence that it's already stabilizing. And in the United States, by mid-April, maybe give or take a week, it'll start to go down after peak coronavirus. So don't forget, this pandemic has a timeline. The level of contagion, this so-called R0 number, which is how many people you infect if you get it, China was saying it was 2.4. The media was saying it's between 2 and 3. The actual number is probably much less than 1. What people don't seem to take into account is that once it stabilizes, you infect far fewer people. Like the virus gets into a population, it infects all the elderly people, it infects all the people who are a little weaker or have immune systems a little bit weaker, and then it slows down. That is the case for every pandemic. It's the case for this pandemic in China and South Korea and other countries, and it's going to happen here as well. So please, let's stop all the extra restrictions every day. There's a new press conference, more and more restrictions. Instead, it's important to focus on some of the good news. They're working very fast on vaccines and cures. They're working the mortality rate is not as high as people think. China has closed down their last hospital dealing with coronavirus. All of Apple's stores in China have reopened. And I'm not so happy for Apple. I'm not being so happy for China, but I'm happy to know that there is a clear timeline on how long this pandemic is going to last. I also want to mention that everybody is dealing with, this is very different from 9/11, where the fear initially was kind of similar, like, oh, are we going to be attacked? Is it going to go crazy? But let's not forget, 9/11, we had each other. We saw each other in the street. We hugged each other. We called each other. We helped. We visited each other's stores and restaurants. What's very different now is that we're stuck in our house and we're watching the news all the time. We're listening to social media. We're watching all these like idiot kids on TikTok, dancing in the streets because these little guys are immune to the whole thing. So let them do that. But just some suggestions, particularly at night. It seems like at night is when most people are getting the most scared. And then you just wake up and in the morning, and for like 3 seconds, you think the world's normal, and then it suddenly hits you. Oh my gosh, we're on lockdown and this infection is everywhere. Here's what I would say. Don't read the newspapers. You're not going to get healthy or unhealthy if you read the newspapers, but the newspapers are designed to scare you. No newspapers, particularly after like 4 or 5 p.m. It's going to affect your sleep, and you need to sleep 8 or 9 hours a day to keep your immune system high. Trust me when I say you're not going to read anything in the newspaper or watching the news that's going to make your life better during these times. Again, find a few resources that are helpful, that are accurate, that are calming, that are balanced. Don't forget the newspaper has an agenda. Their agenda is to make money, so they're going to panic you. Politicians, for better or for worse, their agenda is to also panic you so that they know they're taking extreme measures and nobody will criticize them for it. And that's fine. You should take extreme measures. I don't want to get coronavirus, so I'm staying inside. Social distancing is important. But the key is to manage fear. Don't read the newspapers. Don't watch TV news. There's no reason to watch every press conference. I'll tell you what happened. Right now, the press conferences are focusing on the cures that are being worked on. The press conferences are focusing on massive financial stimulus. This stimulus is going to be beyond anything we've ever seen before, beyond the Great Depression stimulus, beyond the Great Recession, beyond 9/11. We're firebombing maybe $5 trillion into the economy. That is so ridiculous. On the one hand, it's ridiculous, but on the other hand, it's going to all make us feel like things are coming back to normal within 6, 7, 8 months. Who knows? My concern a little bit is I hear all this stimulus for casinos and cruises and airlines. What about stimulus for the mom and pop restaurants, bars, retail stores that are just starting to close down? There's 28 million small businesses in the United States. If you were to give them $40,000 each so they could pay their rents, they could pay their employees, they can restock inventory, they can survive 1 or 2 months of quarantine. If you give small businesses stimulus, that's going to be better than all this other stimulus they're doing. Otherwise, we're going to get, people very unhappy and so on. So here's another thing. With your phone, call people who need help. Call people who are anxious. Call people who are suffering. Call people who are by themselves. A lot of people are single, don't have families around them, are by themselves. Call them and talk to them. Try to give them some good news. Try to show them that you care. Again, after 9/11, we were all able to go outside and hug each other. Try to do this virtually now as much as you can. Also it's important, this is a good time to stay home and not only rest, but express yourself. Write or take photos or do something creative. I'm not saying consume social media. I'm saying put creative things on social media. This is a time, forget about social media. It used to be called social networking. It's a way we connected with each other. Not media where it's one broadcast to many. It's networking where I can connect with the people I miss and the people I love. Let's use social networking for what it was made for. Be creative, connect with people you love. Now, in terms of dealing with fear, try to do this as much as possible. This is what I try to do. Let's say I start thinking to myself, oh my gosh, how are so-and-so going to stay in business? How is this investment going to do? What if I get it? Blah, blah, blah. Try to label each thought as much as you can, useful or not useful. It's a useful thought to think I'm working on a book so that when this ends, I can maybe publish a book. Or I'm working on a business opportunity so that when this ends, which it will, and it'll end sooner than people think, it's useful to think about things you can do for after this ends. How is your life going to change? How is it going to get better? Not useful is to worry about, oh my gosh, how will the latest restrictions affect my life? Oh my gosh, 100 million people are going to die. It's not useful to think about all these scary rumors and news items and right now, again, the mayor of New York City is talking about a total quarantine, and he's arguing with the governor of New York, who's saying there isn't. It's not useful to think about these things. Let them think about these things. Don't try to overthink things you can't control. So try to label as much as possible every thought, every word, useful, not useful. So again, don't watch the news. It's not that important. Don't watch TV news. Don't read TV news. Don't go on Twitter if you're trying to see the latest anger about politics or the latest anger about coronavirus. Try to not be so angry right now. You have to be there. This is a story, and you want to be the hero of your story. The hero of your story doesn't run under the bed and cry, although that's okay too. The hero of your story calls other people, calls people you love, calls your family, and asks them, how are you doing? Keeps them engaged, tells them about good news instead of just the fear-mongering news. And again, people are criticizing the fear-mongers. No, you have to take this seriously. I agree. Take this seriously. Nobody wants to get coronavirus. But at the same time, and so I believe in social distancing. I'm doing the social distancing. I'm self-quarantining because I don't want to get it. It seems like an ugly virus to get. But at the same time, you have to be aware of the actual numbers. And so to review some of the good news, China has closed down all of their hospitals related to coronavirus because there are no new cases there. And so what does that mean? It means that there is a definite timeline from beginning to end on coronavirus, and it's about 3 months, which means after 6 weeks of coronavirus hitting your country, we start to see fewer and fewer cases every day, and eventually we start to see no cases. And Apple, just to confirm this, Apple is opening up all of their 42 stores in China. They would not be doing that if they thought it was a risk. All the factories in China are opening up. South Korea has fewer and fewer cases. So we see the end of this pandemic. And if you look at the actual fatalities, it is a tiny, tiny percentage of the population, not the grandiose numbers being put out by Harvard and the New York Times. I have great respect for the physicians and scientists that are working on this, but just don't buy into the mania and the hysteria. Do what you can to be safe, but don't succumb to the fear. So I'll take a little break there and let me see if there's any questions, or I'll look on Twitter too to see if there's any questions. So somebody says, okay, let's see if there's questions. Yeah, people are getting depressed. In a few weeks, you'll see suicide and violence. I believe that. So, again, it's important to keep reminding people that there is good news in this. There's always going to be viruses. There's always going to be pandemics. Just in the past 20 years, we've had SARS, MERS, avian flu, swine flu. We've even had a breakout of measles again in the U.S. So there's always going to be viruses, pandemics, diseases, but this coronavirus is an excellent case study that shows you so many details about pandemics. Every pandemic ends. No matter how many people die, the pandemic will end. It looks like coronavirus, the lifespan of coronavirus in a country is 3 months. That's good news. It's not a year, it's 3 months. It may come back, but 3 months and then over gives us time to work on vaccines and cures. Second, the mortality rate is nowhere near what people are saying. The fatality rate is nowhere near what people are saying. Third, I don't even think the level of contagion is anywhere near what people are saying, because we're seeing in every country the weaker people, are the elderly, are hit first, and then the number of contagion goes down sharply. So you look at the cruise ship that was isolated, mostly elderly people, 3,700 people on the ship, 6 people died. Imagine if it was more the demographic makeup of the US, maybe more like 2 or 3 people would die. So again, this is smaller, this is tinier than flu levels. So will this happen in the US? I don't know, but it's certainly at least as likely or more likely than the worst case scenario. So we have to keep in mind these pieces of good news. We also have to keep doing things. It's very important. People forget. People always think when they get sick, oh, I'm going to go to the doctor for a cure. And the doctor gives the medicine, they take it, and then they eat, they get better, and then they go back to their lifestyle, eating horrible food, not sleeping well, and then they get sick again. The important thing to remember now is invest in yourself. It's really important to relax and not stress during this period. Sleep 8 or 9 hours a day. Don't read news all day long. Don't read the latest research. You don't need to know it. It's not going to help you. Focus on the things you enjoy doing at home. Spend time with family, play games, watch TV, and be creative. You get into a flow state when you're creative, and that makes you 5 times as immune as you would be otherwise. So use this time to express yourself and be creative and share that creativity with others and with people you love. Do social networking, meaning go on Facebook and send messages to people, but don't use social media, which is when you're just looking at CNN's Twitter page or the White House's Twitter page. Like, forget about that. Just focus on where you are right now and what you can do to make yourself calm and better. This should be an important way to change your own lifestyle so you're more immune in the future, and so you explore different passions that you have right now. Now that we all have time off from work, this is like a godsend to people who don't get sick. That said, be concerned that you're going to get sick. Be concerned that you're going to spread it. There's nothing wrong with social distancing. I just don't like the ever-increasing panic among government officials where every day we get new regulations about what we're not allowed to do. It's going to put small businesses in danger. What I'm hoping for is there's a good small business stimulus package the same way there's one for cruises and casinos. So funny you say you want to get a poker game together. I'm going to teach my kids poker today, hopefully, or tomorrow, because poker's a great game to play. It lasts all day long, and you could play it. Actually, it's a really great poker player in my building. Maybe I'll try to get him to come over and give us a lesson. So how do you handle days when you feel lazy, but you know you should be productive? And this is from Dre. Dre, it's okay to be lazy today. I have a book deadline in a few weeks, and I keep meaning every day, I'm going to write some more on the book. Maybe I write a little bit, but I've been lazy. It's hard when there's this bombardment of White House press conferences and mayoral press conferences. It's hard to be productive. But just try to be, don't blame yourself if you're not productive all day long. Here's the goal. Here's the goal I set for myself. Do one thing a day. If you did one productive thing a day, you've made your accomplishment for the day. If you do 2, that's a bonus. Congratulations. But just focus on doing one productive thing a day. And you can do that. Take away the 2 hours that you spend watching news. Take away the 2 hours you spend watching TV news. Take away all the time that you're panicking with friends. Instead, replace that with trying to be productive, trying to be creative, calling people you love and asking them how they're doing. So someone's asking, what's my new book about? I spoke about this yesterday, but it's called Skip the Line. And it's actually probably very important right now. It's about how you can change. It's okay to change your passion and your interest at any point in your life. And I kind of explain how I've done that and how to be the best. You don't have to do the 10,000 hour rule to get to be the best. You can do what I call the 10,000 experiment rule much faster with even just a few months, and you could be among the best in the world in your new field of interest. So that's the book I'm working on. I've proven it for myself, and I'm so excited about sharing it, but it's not coming out for another year. Hopefully I finish it. Thank you. Watching this Instagram Live has been the most productive thing you've done today. For me also, it's the most productive thing. And also, what I really wanted to do today, I've been seeing this list of good news, passed around, and someone said, oh no, don't listen to that, it's fake news. So it turns out the fake news is fake news, because I researched every item on this good news list, and I found out they're all true. So for instance, China is closing down the last hospital they opened for coronavirus because the number of cases have gone to zero. There's no new cases. So what does that mean? I'm happy for China, but what it means for us is, again, this coronavirus will end. It'll end from beginning to end in about 3 months, which gives us probably another 2.5 months. But it also peaks. It peaks after about 6 weeks. And now you're seeing in China, things are going back to normal. Slowly, but they're going back to normal. And in some provinces of China, it's fully back to normal. Any other questions? Somebody says, I'll come back to the comedy club if we reopen. I hope so. Am I into ham radio? No, but I don't think we're going to get to the point where the internet goes down and we're going to start needing ham radio. Who does my hair since we are quarantined? I just wake up and roll out of bed. That's the good thing about being social distancing. I don't have to see anybody, so I don't do anything. I barely bathe. Why the arcade machine is blocking the door entrance? Because I have another door here. Which news media is truly unbiased? There is no news media that is unbiased. Believe me, I used to work in the news, and I've even created a news website, and I sold it, and I've written for every newspaper you can imagine. There is no newspaper that's unbiased. Here's what an editorial meeting at a newspaper looks like, and it's important to remember this. An editor sits everybody down at 6 a.m, and he just goes around and says, tell me what you're afraid about today. Okay, write about that. They just want to make you afraid. When you read a headline in the newspaper, understand that is the biggest news. They decided that's the biggest news item to drive people crazy, which is the wrong thing you need right now. Do not read news. Do not watch news. You don't need it. What does it matter to you if there's an extra case in Hawaii or China or Italy that it got coronavirus? I'll let you know if cases start to stabilize, if cases go down. Those are the numbers that are important. Yes, do social distancing because that's what we're doing as a society. No, I don't really agree with more restrictive measures than what are happening now. Yes, this pandemic is going to disappear sooner than we think, and we're gonna all look. I don't want to say we're going to look foolish, because believe me, if I get coronavirus, I would say the exact same thing, but I don't want to get it. But I do think there's going to be a timeline. It's going to end. The fatality rate is going to be much, much less, tiny percentage of what people think. And we're seeing this from the evidence, not only in China, but on the cruise ship of old people, where only 6 people died out of 3,700. We're going to see that. We see this in South Korea, where there were hardly any deaths at all compared to the population of China. Compared to the population of South Korea. And we're going to see the same thing here. It's going to be hardly, as a percentage of the U.S. population, it's going to be a tiny amount of deaths. And so please just look at the real data. This disease is contagious, but is not as contagious as people think after the first wave of it, after the first group of patients get it and it starts to make its way through the country. The disease gets weaker. The immune systems of everyone else who's left gets stronger. Most of the people who get it are walking around without symptoms. There's an estimate that up to 90% of people who get the coronavirus have no symptoms at all, which means all the statistics are 1/10 of what they seem. When should I think of buying a house? What will rates be? Rates are going to be 0. You buy a house whenever you want, but why buy a house? You're going to be able to, renting is going to be close to 0. So rents are going to go down first. So I wouldn't buy a house anytime soon. What am I reading right now? I am reading today a collection of short stories, The Pugilist at Rest by Tom Jones. I am also reading The Catalyst by Jonah Berger, How to Change Anyone's Mind, and there's a lot of great stories in there. It's very interesting. Focus on things that educate you and make you more creative and excite you and make you happier. Read The Power of Now in terms of dealing with stress, or read Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed is a beautiful book. Read things that are going to encourage you and improve you right now. should I take my money out of the stock market? Great question. And the answer is no. The market's already assumed. I mean, the market's fallen by 33% already. So the stock market has already baked in the odds of a massive, massive recession. There are so many opportunities now in the stock market. Does that mean it's the time to buy? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't really like when there's so much. For a long-term investor, the best thing you can do is just wait. My initial fear in the beginning of this was that we were going to shut down the stock market, but Trump has, and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin has said repeatedly that they're not going to shut down any markets, and I firmly believe that. That would be a completely insane thing to do. And so just sit on your hands and wait. Things will become more and more stable over the next month and 2 months. How would I rate my chess skills? I'm about 2,200 strength, so a master of strength. Here's an idea. Look at sites like Etsy to see what's selling, and maybe you can sell these things as well. That's a good idea. People should look for opportunities right now. I've been thinking someone should make T-shirts, Wuhan lacrosse T-shirts, something like that. Favorite snack? Unfortunately, my favorite food of all is pasta, but I think carbs are probably not the best thing, so I've been avoiding them. I'm going to tweet out a reading list. So I did tweet out a small list yesterday. I'll make a better list probably for tomorrow, and even talk about it on this IG Live. Somebody asked, where do I have the 3 months from? So I've been saying coronavirus, the lifespan of coronavirus is about 3 months. If you look at China, China seems to have started in mid to late December, give or take. They claim December 28th. It's probably a little bit earlier. They were probably lying. But January, February. Now here it is mid-March, and there are no new cases. What is that? 3 months. It started in China. China denied it. China lied about it. China was a disaster area. China has a huge population of smokers and heavy pollution, and it still only lasted 3 months from beginning to end in China. The hospitals are closed. Factories are open. Apple just reopened 42 stores in China. They would not do that if they thought there was a risk. So in China, coronavirus lasted 3 months. In South Korea, it looks like it's going to last 3 months. Why would it last more in the United States? I don't understand why people think in China there's 3,000 deaths. In South Korea, there's like minuscule number of deaths. Why do people act like there's going to be 10 million deaths in the U.S.? That's insanity talking. Just look at the data. It's several things. It's not as contagious as people thought, particularly after the beginning stages. At the halfway point, number of infected cases starts to go down, and then number of deaths start to go down. The fatality rate is probably not as great as they are saying because there's probably up to 90% of cases are asymptomatic. This doesn't mean I care if I get the disease or not. I don't want to get the disease. I'm doing social distancing. I would be very upset if I got the disease. We should protect people from getting the disease. Particularly if you're older, you should make sure you stay inside and social distance. But even if you're younger, you should do social distancing so as not to infect others. Believe me, I do not want to get it, but I would still be saying the same thing, which is that the pandemic is going to last 3 months, give or take. The peak of the pandemic will probably be around April 15th. Again, give or take. Who knows the exact date? It's not on my calendar. But people are saying it's not over in China. But that said, the factories are opening, the hospitals are closing, and Apple is reopening stores. I'm sure some people are still sick. I'm sure there's still new cases, but I have not heard about millions of new cases. I hear about 3 new cases. What have we gleaned from Italy and China? Italy, we're still learning. Now, in the past few days, I have seen at least one chart that shows cases are stabilizing in Italy, which maybe means Italy has hit their peak, but it's unclear. I also think you have to be a little bit aware, now that we're doing massive testing in the US, there's going to be a spike in number of cases because we're just testing more. Great question. Can you get it twice? By the way, I'm not a doctor, but I'm only going to answer these questions because I have spoken to doctors for my podcast about these questions. So there was a lot of concern whether there was immunity with this or not. And the immunity for this might not be as strong as the immunity for like smallpox or the measles, but there is some immunity. So if you get it, you're probably not going to get it again anytime soon. Will you get it again next year? Nobody knows. But if you get it now, you're probably immune for at least the duration of this pandemic. There was some, again, this is why you shouldn't read the news. There were news reports, panicky news reports, people getting the virus again as soon as they're released from the hospital. Guess what? They were released from the hospital when they still had it. That's what the evidence showed. So, again, don't read every panicky headline. How can you compare China response to the U.S. response and not see why it will last longer here? I don't get it. China is the worst disaster case in the world. That place has no infrastructure at all, and they were lying to us. And even in China, it seemed to last only 3 months. So why should it last longer than 3 months here? I don't know. The case in Italy is Italy has not gotten to even their peak level yet. The peak might be at the end of March. Italy is 10 days ahead of us. So if our peak happens in mid-April, Italy's peak will happen in early April. That said, I have seen one chart this morning that showed cases in Italy were starting to stabilize, suggesting a peak. Germany, I don't know anything about, but I know Germany is taking very restrictive measures. They've closed their borders and so on. So, okay, China isolated. I sort of feel in the U.S. we haven't done 100% isolation. But don't forget, isolation doesn't change the timeline of the pandemic. It just reduces the number of people who will get infected. So yes, isolation is a good thing, but panic is a bad thing. You have to learn to be calm. And so a good technique for being calm is to take all of your thoughts and kind of meta-think about your thoughts. Label each thought, is this useful for me or is this not useful for me? Is it useful for me to think that 100 million people are going to die? No. Is it useful for me to maybe watch a sitcom on Netflix? Probably yes. Is it useful for me to write an article or a diary entry? Yes. Is it useful for me to paint that painting I've always wanted to paint? Yes, because creativity boosts your immune system. Is it useful for me to stay up all night reading scary news? No. Is it useful for me to sleep 8 hours? Yes, because that boosts your immune system. Social distancing this is an interesting point. Social distancing, you say, is the only tool we have as a society. I agree that social distancing is very, very important. But social distancing is our tool as an individual. So I don't want to get coronavirus, so I'm social distancing. I don't want to infect others if I have it, so I'm social distancing. I don't want to get it. But as a society, we should remember, and I keep repeating it, but I'll keep repeating it, pandemics have a lifetime of about 3 months. That's what the evidence suggests. Who knows how if for some reason it's different in the United States, but why should it be different than China and South Korea? Why should it be different than SARS and MERS and other pandemics? I don't know, but it'll probably have a 3-month timeline in the US, which means the peak is in a month and a half. So no matter what in society, this pandemic is going to end and we have to move on with life. We have to move on with the economy. Someone says every country is different. Doctors don't know long how it will last. That's not necessarily true. I spoke to a doctor on my podcast on Monday who actually was talking about a worst case scenario. So I was talking to Dr. Marty McCary from Johns Hopkins on my podcast on Monday. He was talking worst case scenario, but he did remind me that pandemics have a lifetime of 3 months. So I'm taking it from two sources. One is a doctor who is a top specialist in the field, and the other is you just look at China, you look at South Korea, you look at prior pandemics. 3 months with a peak in the middle. Yes, and so if you're on a trial medication and your doctors want you to stay inside, stay inside. I'm staying inside because I don't want to get it. But if I did get it, and if I came on here and I said, listen, I have it, I would say the exact same thing. You still don't want to panic. You still want to respect the fact that this has a timeline that will end. And so when it comes around to June and it looks like this has ended and the stock market is shooting up, be prepared. Make sure you use this time to relax, to learn skills, to be creative, to make your life better, to show the people you love that you love them. This is the brilliant thing. This is the great thing. You have carte blanche right now to email anybody you want and say, hey, I hope things are going well. So I've been spending time emailing all of my ex-podcast guests, no matter how big and famous or how not famous. Hey, how's it going? I hope you're okay. And it just gives me this great excuse. I'm an introvert and I'm even shy about sending emails to people. It would be this great excuse. Just reach out to people. Doesn't matter how famous they are, and just say, hello, I'm thinking about you. I hope you're okay. This is a great time to do networking. It's a great time to be creative. It's a great time to get closer to your family and your relationships. It's a great time to tell people you miss how much you love them. And it's a great time to sleep, because what are your choices to sleeping? Just watching the panicky news? Don't even look at the stock market. Look in the stock market towards the end of April, because the same opportunities are going to exist. You might miss the bottom. Who cares? Miss the bottom. You don't need to think about making every dollar right now. There's going to be plenty of opportunities on April 16th or April 20th or April 25th. Look at the stock market then. Don't look at your account. Everyone's scared about going broke. People will go broke in this, and I hope the stimulus affects small, I hope somehow we can help small businesses, because I feel Main Street is not being helped with all this trillions of dollars in stimulus, but there is massive stimulus coming to the economy. Any other last questions? And then I will continue to do this. I feel today I provided some new information that I've been researching, which is good news on what over-the-counter antiviral drugs maybe you could take, what is happening around the world that might be good rather than bad. Hiring is way down. I don't expect hiring to go up for the next few months, and I don't expect advertising to go up for the next few months. Someone's asking my thoughts on dowry payments. I have no clue. Don't get married if you're depending on a dowry payment. Any book recommendations for the distancing? Sure. John Grisham has a new novel, The Reckoning. Just get absorbed in a novel. But also, a really great book that's always helped me is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It's about living in the present and focusing on what's happening inside your life, inside right now. Feel where you're stressed and try to relax that area of your body. And again, try to label each thought useful, not useful. All of these panicky thoughts are not useful for your growth as a human being. This is an opportunity to be the hero in your story and not the victim. Every human is playing out their own story. Be the hero of your story, and that means reach out to people you love. It means be creative. It means try to help people. It means try to be a voice of reason and not panic. Someone's asking me to explain the idea engine. So creativity, a lot of people say, oh my gosh, I'm going to be creative. Lightning's going to hit me and I'm going to be creative. I had a friend once, she told me, I want to be a painter, but I can't be a painter unless I move to Paris and I live in the south of France or whatever. No, get paint and a piece of paper and paint right now. Creativity is a muscle. Coming up with ideas is a muscle. Every single day, you must write 10 ideas a day down. I write 10 ideas a day down every day on my waiter's pad, and that you write just bad ideas down, because then that exercises your idea muscle. And I can guarantee you, if you write 10 ideas a day down and other people don't, you're going to be like an idea machine. Ideas are just going to flow to you, no matter what's happening in the economy, no matter what's happening outside your house. You're just going to flow with tons of ideas. So I'll leave you with that. But also, again, remember, I'll summarize, don't understand that this pandemic is going to end. It'll probably end by the end of May, the beginning of June. It'll probably peak in the United States by mid to end of April, just like it did in China, just like it did in South Korea after 1.5 months. The evidence is getting good. China's closed all their hospitals devoted to coronavirus. Apple opened up all their stores there. South Korea is having fewer and fewer cases. Even Italy might have stabilized a little bit. So we'll see. And again, focus on the things that you can do for yourself. I'll come back tomorrow with more news and more observations on the latest goings on. And I hope you tune in. I'm going to do these Instagram lives every day at 2 p.m. until this whole crisis ends. And I'm also talking to specialists later today that I'm very looking forward to. I'm talking to some top scientists and other people relating to the economy. So I'll have some more things tomorrow. Investment advice is just do what you need to do. But the best thing you can do right now is not look at the stock market. Act like a long-term investor. Don't be in such a rush to make a decision when everyone's panicking, because you don't know if you're panicking or not. So the best investment you can make is in yourself right now so you don't panic. Figure out, you know what your 10 ideas for today should be? Figure out the 10 ways you can calm yourself down. The best investment in yourself right now is to calm yourself down. So that puts you way ahead of all the people who are panicking. This is how you become the hero of your story. Absolute final question. Someone asked me if I'm an introvert. I'm absolutely an introvert. This quarantining is the best thing that could have happened to me as long as I don't get sick. So make use of this time. Be productive. Call people that you love. But most importantly, instead of worrying about your investments in the stock market, which really don't matter right now, write down your list of 10 ideas today. Write down the 10 ways you can invest in yourself and make yourself a better person. Make yourself the hero of your own story. I'll be back again 2 p.m. tomorrow. If you have other questions, you can ask me on Twitter and I will answer in this IG Live tomorrow. I'm also going to share this to my story, so this will be available for another 24 hours on the live part of my story. Thanks so much. Once again, I really enjoy doing this, and I'm really happy for all the people who come on and interact with me here. Thank you so much.